gets us over to Allen Pond, and then there's a few little bases Yes.
Everyone to take their seats, please. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Minert. I'm the City of Bowie Planning Director, and I'd like to welcome you here today for the Trails Master Plan Workshop. This is a very important step in the preparation of the city's Trails Master Plan update. So we're really glad to see you tonight or today and taking your time out on a Saturday to help us with this effort. So we really appreciate that. We have our consultant here today, Jim Klein of Larger Klein Associates, and his associate, Lori Moore, is also here. We also have a few city staff members which are going to help to facilitate at the tables when we get into the table discussions. We may, because of the few people that are here, we may ask some of the people in the back later on to move up and join some of the tables toward the front, but we'll cover that in a little bit. I wanted to say that the purpose of this workshop is really to get the input from you on a couple of key issues. And we have a couple of exercises in this workshop that will allow you to give us your feedback, and we're going to record the feedback on the boards and share that information with the group. One of the most important things to focus on with this Trails Plan update is the fact that the city's trail system does exist now, but it has a lot of shortcomings, and a lot of you know what those are. You know what I'm talking about, that there's areas of improvement, there's things that we should be thinking about that we're not thinking about, and so what we're hoping to get from you is suggestions on how we can make the most of the trail system that exists today. We do have a really nice trail system. It's well known throughout the area, but it's somewhat incomplete, somewhat in a state of disrepair. And so those are the types of things we'd like to zero in on with this discussion. And any kind of feedback you can give us on locations, specific locations that we could address deficiencies or future connections, that's what we're looking for today. And so you have the maps at the tables, and as we go on, we'd like you to feel free to write your suggestions right on those maps, and we'll take that all under advisement. So that's what we're planning to do today. I'd like to turn the meeting over to Jim Klein. He'll review the agenda with you, and we'll get started. Jim?
Great, thanks, Joe. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for turning out on this lovely day. It's going to warm up. I can feel it in my bones any moment. So I'm going to just spend maybe about 20 minutes with kind of an overview of what we're doing with the plan, and then the bulk of it is really going to be you talking amongst yourselves and getting stuff down on a map to try to give us feedback and input to that. So it's, and then toward the end, we'll ask each table then to come back and report on what you've been discussing. Joe mentioned that you have a great system of trails. And there's a lot of individual pieces of trail that are fantastic, great spots. Some of them are wearing a little bit, showing their age, I guess. And so our goal, I think, at the end of this is to turn all those individual segments, how do we do that, to turn that into a network of trails, and give those trails some identity, make it easier for people to use those trails, and encourage more people to do that. So the original master plan is shown its age. It's 2002. It was revised again in 2008, and here we are in 2019. And it's time really to take almost really, if you look at the plan, a lot of it has been done. So you had some success. So now it's the next generation of what that plan should be like. One thing I wanted to mention with that, is that a key component of this is the sustainability plan that many of you work and were involved with, which really identified this overall goal we've been speaking with about a network of trails and making it easier for people to get access to those trails for all kinds of good reasons in terms of your sustainability plan and more people riding and walking. are using human-powered transportation, then that has a great impact in the end on our carbon footprints as we move forward. And so we've tried at first to kind of compile all the existing trail maps and plans that have been done. The county has trail plans. They have a master plan of transportation. They recently completed a parks trails plan that kind of consolidates a lot of that. So the stuff around the perimeter of the of Bowie is key. And so you'll see that those maps that you see over there and the photos over there, I'm going to kind of walk you through the different types of trails that you have now. And they have different terms, and those terms since 2002 have evolved a little bit, but we're going to use the terms that we show here as part of those trails. So the first type of trail is really a multi-use trail. And in the past, they were 8 feet wide was okay, but as we got to ride more and they increased in use, we realized, and many trail users realized 8 feet isn't wide enough, so really that's moved to 10 feet. Some of them in really heavy use areas might be 12 feet, but those trails accommodate all users, and so they typically are going to have to be wider. Collington Road or the WB&A are your examples now, and both of those have been here for a while and are serve as important assets to you. The second type of trails might be similarly multi-use trails, but they're located within parks. So the trails in parks, some of them are paved, some of them are natural surface, so they have a variety of types of uses. Both White Marsh and Allen Pond Park have good sort of trail connections to get into and out of those parks to the adjoining neighborhoods. Then there are side paths, which are a little less than 8 feet, but wider than a sidewalk. So I've kind of thrown out that 6 to 8 foot. It's kind of a term that side path term may or may not be built much more in the future. I'm not sure. We'll get back to that. But they're hard to ride on when you have a lot of driveways. So typically they've come up with new technologies and things that make those kinds of side paths a little better, and I'll talk about that toward the end. But example there in Annapolis Road, there by the shopping center, or along some of the other city streets, you'll see on one side a sidewalk and on the other side a little bit wider, asphalt sometimes concrete. And those are shown on the map as side paths. And then there are sidewalks, that are typically what everybody walks on. They're narrower, they're 5 or 6 feet wide, sometimes narrower. They're on bridges sometimes, if you're lucky. They're in front of shopping centers, they're in neighborhoods. And so that whole system of sidewalks has been inventoried sort of using some data about impermeable surfaces. So they exist, that there is an inventory. You won't see that on your map because it would make the map hard to read. But we're not forgetting about the sidewalks. It's an important component. And then moving kind of into the street are bike lanes. There aren't a lot of bike lanes in the city itself. I think there's maybe 4 different areas I think where I've seen bike lanes. But those bike lanes typically provide space along the side of the road. They give you usually a stripe and a little bicycle logo that's marked on there. The picture on the left kind of shows you one in Cambridge, Maryland, that is adjacent to parking. So the parking in this case is on the outside toward the curb, but I'll talk a little bit about that again, a different version of that. But that also shows that parking area is actually permeable surfaces where the stormwater is integrated into that road edge. Most of the state highways that have, or county roads that have bike paths are just the stripe, the asphalt stripe, and then the shoulder area is used. And then there's a shared roadway. You see throughout the city that the city's been busy putting up those signs, the shared roadway signs. So that means that it's really just cars and bicycles are using the same pavement. Sometimes you have more pavement, sometimes less. On Racetrack Road, for example, it kind of narrows, as you get closer into town. So your pavement might start out being real wide, and then that shoulder starts to narrow. But if you ever ride a bike when it narrows, then that's one of the challenges you face coming to those places. There are throughout the region, large destination trails. The ones that you have here that are important to Bowie are the WB&A trail that people use. It's kind of, and then also what's called the East Coast Greenway. And they recently put some signs on the East Coast Greenway up. You'll see those, they're white signs with green lettering. You see the logos there. There's also a network of I would call them an advocacy network, if anything. The Capital Trails Coalition put together a map that shows important regional trails. They have criteria to get that designation, and they use that network to enthusiastically support improvements to those areas. So some of the routes in this area are on that network, which is a good thing, and that's shown on one of the maps over there as well. You also have a great destination trail in the making, the Bowie Heritage Trail, which is an excellent way that you can envision some of the trails that you might want to develop in the future. It goes, roughly in and around Old Town, and it provides not only a good route to walk or ride, but also things to see and do along the way. So that's another type of facility that you have in the making. How many of you saw and filled out the survey that we had on the online? And I realized that there was a few that I was just talking to a gentleman that doesn't really get too much access online. Could probably better for that. So if you did not see the survey, it's kind of, we can still use it. We can get a hard copy through Joe. I think I'll figure out how to do that. But see us at the end if you want to see that. A printout or a link to it, I can reopen it or some way get your access, because it's a good way to get input. But we asked a lot of good questions and we got a lot of great feedback. We had 320 some responses. Nearly everyone went and filled the whole thing out, which is even better. It was about 10 minutes long, so I think it was about the right. So we didn't ask all the questions we wanted to ask, but we asked a good selection of them. Most of the people, 2/3 of them filling it out, live in Bowie but work elsewhere. A smaller portion, 1/4 of them live and work in Bowie. Not too many live out of Bowie and work in Bowie. I think we had one, but there was that's another factor. And then the visitors, people that live elsewhere but visit Bowie, as you do more things like the Bowie Heritage Trail, you're going to get more of those. What they did say, the respondents, which I think what I would say represented trail users for the most part, active participants in trails. But 2/3 of those respondents, or well, 64%, indicated that walking or being nearby to walking and bicycling was either important or very important, extremely or very important to their choice of where they work or live. And that's pretty amazing. So that's a key finding that we had there. About 2/3 of the respondents walk for exercise at least 20 minutes every day. That's pretty good. I like that. And then 62%, I'm guessing it's probably the same group, also enjoy that. They walk for fun. Or they're walking the dog, And so there is a smaller group that, I'm going to make another 10 yards here. That's me. On the bicycling side, about 41% ride for exercise at least once a week, and about 44% ride for fun once a week. Again, the same kind of, it's fun to exercise on a bike or walking. 39% of those bicyclists identify themselves as fair weather bicyclists. That's ones that are not going to ride here today. So that's me. But 25% were 3 or 4 season. I think there was at least one bicyclist that came here. So they're the ones that really are total enthusiasts. Sometimes they ride more in the street and less on the separated paths, especially if those paths are narrow. They ride at a pretty good clip, and they're comfortable riding. So in all weather or all conditions. They still may come to places where they're not comfortable, where you're trying to get across Route 50 or across a narrow bridge and places like that. So those are also important to that group. How far do they go? About 3/4 walk more than a mile in one direction. So that's 2 miles. That's pretty good. And 70% ride for at least 4 to 5 miles in one direction. So that's an 8 to 10 mile round trip. And you'll see when we do our exercise, I'm going to kind of stick to that notion. This kind of word cloud, we asked, for people to write in destinations, places they'd like to go that are able to reach or access walking or riding a bicycle. And you can see those big word clouds in the middle, the WV&A, park, town or town center, trails. You'll see sort of at the next level, mostly parks and schools kind of came in there as well. The map over on the right, which I'm going to show you a picture of shortly, is the kind of result of clusters of those destinations. You could also, and you can still do this online, you can go onto the project website and put a pin where your destination would like to be. And so we had it wasn't up for the whole time. I don't think we had the service. It's been up for a couple weeks that way. Again, you can still go onto that and do this, but you can see sort of these heat maps of clusters that start to emerge from that, so that we're able to kind of say, well, a lot of people like to go to Bowie Town Center walking or riding a bike, or a lot of people like to go to Old Town or to Bowie State, and we didn't limit it to just in the city, so it does capture some of those things that are just out of the city on the edge. And from that, then, we were able to do this type of mapping that to sort of begin to show the categories of places people like to get to riding or walking a bike, and then and identify these clusters of areas. And you see that through those orange, and that's on the next map, actually, the sort of orangish groupings. And that's important because when looking at where people want to go, that might be a way to begin to set some priorities for how to take your trail network that you have now and begin to orient and focus on those destinations. So some of the destinations are like up in the northern area would be Bowie State or Mark Station or Old Town, the Heritage Trail. And it will become, some people say, yeah, when it's open, I'm ready to go. So, Annapolis Road, some of the shopping centers, the high school, Racetrack Road in and of itself. You can see different conditions along Racetrack Road. The Bowie community centers, the trail along 197, the Fox Hill Park there, White Marsh Park, Sport Fit, Governor's Bridge Park, all those things showed up multiple times. The elementary school, Northview Elementary School, Allen Pond Park, the Heritage Boulevard area, the City Hall vicinity, Bowie Town Center. Then further south, the stadium, the connection there from the ballpark to Governor's Bridge, that little bridge, Black Sox Park, all those were identified, Northview Drive, and sometimes people identify destinations where they were concerned, they raised concerns about certain things like Northview Drive, they're going too fast, I can't cross the street, so those things showed up in those destination comments as well. And with all that data in mind, then our next step is really then to show, well, where are things happening now? What do the current plans say? And the plan that you have is mostly built out, but the county plans kind of pick away at some of the pieces around the outside. Racetrack Road, for example, is indicated in the county's. They're responsible for that road. So if you think about the roads themselves, there's either state roads or county roads, and then some city streets. And so Racetrack Road still is out there in the plans for modifications, and that's a hopeful thing in the near future. And then like extending along Annapolis Road from roughly along White Marsh Park there toward Route 3. So those plans, we kind of poured through those, and we're still trying to sort out, well, are those real plans, or are they, is it never going to happen? And so that's something we'll want to kind of figure out as part of this process and provide input back to the county and state on those facilities. You also, the planning staff, I think, does this, has a great report that has all the active development and transportation projects that you're following and hoping to have happen. And that map is the second one to the end there. Again, Racetrack Road, you'll see is on that list, a piece of it. and it's really the piece that is more wooded and narrow that's out there. And then Maryland 450 is in that also, but it's the engineering that's near completion, but no money, so no state money to do it. But there's a trail section in there that would solve a lot of the people's concerns that were raised as part of the survey, but that, has to kind of get to the next level, buying right of way and making the construction happen. There's also, people raise a number of issues about barriers, being able to get from one side of Bowie to the other, across 50 or Annapolis Road, or across the stream valleys or the railroads. All of those kind of create pinch points or places that you have challenges to be able to get across. Some of those pinch points, like here the bridge over by the railroad station there, is quite narrow, and if there's plans in the future to replace that bridge, you need to always be on top of it and thinking about it now so that you get the width that you need for walking and bicycling. Or out here on, getting underneath Crane Highway, there's plenty of space under the bridge, but it's just a challenge because of all the different turning movements people make. It becomes a barrier because you're nervous about crossing in front of turning traffic. So that we kind of get a feel from the survey respondents a lot about some of those issues. We have a good list of them, but we want to make sure that we identify any of those again today. So some of those barriers can be overcome. It just takes a little effort. Of course, the wide intersections is really one of the critical things. In our survey, we found out that the top obstacles for pedestrians were darkness, so lit trails, I guess. But, unpredictable driver behavior, the weather, too many barriers, and similarly for bicyclists as well, but uncomfortable sharing the roadway, or that same unpredictable driver behavior, or too many barriers were the top choices. The top physical improvements that people want to see are better connectivity and trail conditions, the existing surfaces and trails that sort of narrow into these pinch points. They want to see those improve, more dedicated paths and walks, better crossings, more separation. And the same for bicyclists, improve the trails and lanes that you have, more vehicle separation, improving the crossings, and more multi-use trails. So I think between bicycling and walking, it's a pretty common set of issues and concerns, which is good to see. We can focus and achieve more bang for the buck. So I mentioned earlier that since the timing of your last plan, and even since the 2008 update, maybe a few years ago you started to see things like NACDO, National Association of, I can't remember what the C means, the City Transportation Officials, came out with some new, I don't want to call them standards, but I would say guidance on how to accommodate walking and bicycling in more built-up areas that are begin to take some of the innovations that people have been trying to implement and apply them and give them some engineering judgment as the basis for making those, which makes it easier for Maryland Department of Transportation or the county departments of transportation to use that basis for making their own decisions. So as you think about overcoming some of these barriers, you'll see that these sort of terms like cycle track, where there's space carved out on the side of the road, you kind of reallocate the pavement. And DC has a lot of these now. You put up the ubiquitous plastic bollards, and you carve out that 10 foot of space for back and forth movement. Or in other parts of the country, you see kind of integrating traffic calming measures with pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So you're slowing the traffic down and carving out more space for them. And so that's a key item. Maryland has a state law now, which is great, that says thou shalt have a complete street policy. It includes all of the transportation agencies have to do that. There's some exceptions and things in that legislation, but it says what these complete streets are. And a complete street is really about creating a comprehensive and integrated and connected transportation network that allows users to choose among different modes of transportation. So that Maryland law, which was signed by the governor last summer, then stipulates that each agency will have a policy. Now, State Highway Administration and MDOT had a policy They've had it for a while. It's hit or miss whether it's somehow it gets applied. It would be great, but it may be that you now have the language that you can use to then encourage them to make those kinds of improvements that would make things, give you more space and make it safer to use for pedestrians and bicyclists and people taking the bus and all kinds of things. And the county also has similar legislation, a complete streets policy that they have adopted. So that covers a good chunk of your circulation. There's roads in here. The city has some of those roads, but most of those city streets I do not think are in the more heavily traveled parts of the city. And so when people ask for more space or more separation, this diagram kind of shows a continuum. This, I think, was put out by Salt Lake City. It has a great pedestrian bicycle plan, but it starts with the space that you have available just riding on the street, that shared roadway, or increasing that space to put those little logos, the bicycle logo on the street saying this is a shared roadway, or the sign that goes with it. Or then you start to stripe the road to give dedicated space for bicyclists. And you stripe and mark those shoulders. Or as you begin then, in the recent years, we figured out that if you put a little buffer between where you have a bike lane and moving traffic, it's safer for bicyclists. And so that's an example of one here. I think that's in Arlington. That's the first buffered bicycle lane that they used. And then as you move into the sort of more physical improvements beyond just paint and plastic bollards, sometimes they raise up those facilities. A raised bicycle lane would be an example of that, and where the sidewalk shown here is separated by a kind of a curb and some pavement. It's much more of a physical barrier that allows you to do that. And then that gets all the way to that cycle track picture I showed you just recently, where it's actually a divider. So that's kind of the range of improvements that you can make to the streets to hopefully make some of these connections you've been having trouble with, using some of the street right-of-way. Some other examples, like, I don't know if you've been to Indianapolis, this is one of the world's most popular facilities. The Indianapolis Cultural Trail actually separates out the traffic. There's a kind of a raised up median here, and then the multi-use trail, and then it's separated again for pedestrians. So when you have a lot of people, walking, you get some of this in parts of the Capitol Crescent Trail, if you're familiar with that, where there's so many people jogging, walking, strolling, that you begin to need to begin to separate that. In your wildest success, you're hoping everybody will do this, but you have to plan for it in some way. Or in Washington, D.C., even like around bus facilities, they pull the bike lane around it, so there's ways to kind of encourage more space for pedestrians and bicyclists and buses. And then like in Salt Lake City, here's an example of markings that are become more innovative, you're now allowed to use this green color, which I've been doing this for a while, so I remember when I tried to get people to color tint the bike lane, I want the whole thing tinted, but that wouldn't happen. But now you can do the intersections and changes in conditions as a warning to people as they come through. Because whenever you allocate space just for a bike lane, for example, or a multi-use trail, and people need to cross it, that becomes a really difficult design situation. And finally, the last couple examples here, slowing traffic down in conjunction with this elements. It's not, a lot of people say that if you widen the pavement, people will speed up, and I'm pretty comfortable saying that, yes they do. But if you allocate that pavement and make it look different than the roadway, then that condition doesn't happen. So people will often say if you're giving more space or widening the roadway, you're going to get people driving faster. But here's an example of using traffic calming or bump outs at intersections, ways to kind of reduce the picture frame that people are seeing as they drive, so it doesn't look like they can floor it as they go through. And so in terms of for pedestrians then at each of those intersections, you have to figure out how to narrow the crossing distance. And a lot of communities have built bump outs now Some of those bump outs serve to calm traffic, others to shorten the distance. And you see some of these other intersections in Portland, Oregon, they use them also for stormwater. So it infiltrates in there, it's really a nice touch. Because as the water, and that's always a problem, if you bump the curb out, where does the water go? Because most of the inlets are at the intersections. On really wide arterials, they're coming back in and inserting intersection treatments to put in protected places for pedestrians to cross kind of halfway, so that they don't have to do the full Monte as they cross a big wide street. Or in a combination, this is in Salt Lake when they actually painted this in. There's a pretty cool video you can look at to see how these work. But there are protected intersections where you take all those variables, cycle tracks or the protected curb lanes, the pedestrians, the right turning traffic, left turning traffic, and you sort that out through these kind of brightly colored and movements around the corners. It's too complicated to kind of show and talk about this, but it's a pretty cool thing. But it can be done where you have a real complicated intersection. Anywhere on Annapolis Road might qualify here, that you can sort out all those movements. And it is really the right and left turns, people driving at too high a speed and making quick turns that are most dangerous for pedestrians and bicyclists. And so that's intended to sort that out. I think there's a simpler method that they've been using, and most of the jurisdictions around now have adopted it just to extend or put sort of a little barrier, like a traffic calming kind of barrier, to force people to make the slower turn, so they don't cut the turn, which is the most dangerous thing. So that type of information is what we really need to have you now. Where are these places that need sort of to be addressed to make the connections possible? So in the end, I think there is something called a walk score. It was written into the RFP, I believe, but Bowie's walk score, because it's an older suburban area, isn't real high, but I think you're moving toward getting it higher. People use this sometimes anymore, at least my children's age, that do it to buy real estate. So that walk score, which 25 is not real high, maybe we can get it up, is critical to what we're doing.
That's out of 100?
Yeah. And then the Surgeon General, one Surgeon General ago, came out with this great poster about walking for health. So again, all the people that in this room can make that happen, so that you end up with a better connected system, makes it easier to go from your house to a park or to school or churches, and that has a great health benefit for all. So that's the kind of nuts and bolts of what this plan is hoping to do, where we're hoping to go with it. You'll see in your handout, if you need more information, there's the web link there. Joe is your point of contact. If you have ideas after you leave today and want to make sure you communicate those, please do. If there are any questions about the process, let me take a few and then we'll go right into the other. Yeah.
So I just read the timeline for this. What is the expectation with respect to implementation? Because I moved to Bowie in 1994, and all these plans for Old Town Bowie and nothing's happened. So I
94, and it's under construction now, right?
Yeah.
So, yes.
I'm just wondering how long it's going to take for this plan to actually be implemented.
So that is a really great question. So, and that's why we have the map with the purple lines on it. You see over there, those are active construction or development projects. So in terms of implementation, some things can get implemented through a development process or through a transportation project that is needed for other reasons. And so those might go faster if you pay attention to those. Some of the things might take longer because they're capital improvements, so you have to figure out either how to finance them through bonding or through other types of implementation measures. That typically takes a little longer because then it's a process to get that financing to work. So the purpose of the plan then is to try to identify those kinds of things that are the top priorities that you want to get done faster than what's 2018 to 94, what is that? 20 some years, so it shouldn't take that long. Some things do, but it should be faster than that. So,
What does faster mean? Like, what does that mean?
well, if you, I don't know, Joe, if you want to respond or.
2 years, I mean, what numbers?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just gonna add to what Jim was saying. So I worked on the Bowie plan in '91 and then the Bowie plan in 2004, and we're actually about to update it again. And we looked at what got implemented between those two plans, 13 years. And I believe it was like 14 miles of trails, and some of them were implemented through development, some were through county CIP, some through the state CIP, capital improvement, and then some through the park and planning program. So it gets implemented in different ways. And like Jim was saying, some of it's just contingent on when development takes place. But the county, the state, and park and planning all have their own capital improvement programs. And I think part of the goal of this project is to identify what the priorities are and then to try to get them into those work programs. So I think that 91 to 2004, like 14 miles of trail was implemented. I suspect when we update the plan again in a couple of years, you'll see a similar rate of progress. And I think the goal for this project, or for me as a county staff person, is to identify what the project's priorities are and then get them into the improvement program.
hopefully that answers your question. It's not an exact science, but it is a process. You know, and what the plan will help you do is get those things that are your priorities into the pipeline faster.
I'm Bob Patton. I'm with the Department of Parks and Recreation. If you step back and look at what happened in different parts of the country, the communities that have been able to move most quickly have been the communities that have found a way to finance a plan. So like in Seattle, they did a bond measure with a lot of different public improvements and then had a whole initiative for bike and pedestrian improvements. They, over a 10 or 20 year period, developed a finance plan that would generate over $1 billion.
You can look at Kansas City or Indianapolis. I showed you that picture of the Indianapolis Trail. Similarly, you know, financing those improvements accelerated the pace.
Yeah, but so far in Prince George's County, what that has been described to you is we have existing political processes for allocating money every year. Different jurisdictional agencies have their different capital programs. We have zoning and development laws that require and give us an opportunity to ask developers to contribute public amenities. We have all these different methodologies to finance it. It makes it a lot more complicated, and this is a master plan. It doesn't lead to a direct implementation plan where the process of implementation is laid out. So it takes a group of people to own the plan and keep pushing the different buttons over time to make things happen. The good news is that generally our elected officials at the county level think this stuff is pretty good. The elected officials at your city level think this stuff is pretty good. Our planning board that governs the park budget and governs development, they think this stuff is pretty good. So we don't have a lot of resistance, but nonetheless, you have to keep pushing and as citizens help the government entities keep it all coordinated and moving in the right direction.
Okay, any other like process plan? Everybody knows what we're doing, I hope, from this, where we're going, yeah.
I noticed when you had the examples of the various cities where they're doing really good stuff,
Yes.
bicyclists and pedestrians, the Europeans are so far ahead of us on this. And no European examples of what they might be doing. Can we get something?
We can,
from
yeah.
Europe?
And we can add some of those, and I try not to use too many European examples because we now actually have examples in the United States that are pretty good. So I'm trying to keep that up. But yeah, we can always get the great.
That's it, but the Europeans are so far ahead of us.
That's because they started 35 years ago.
Yeah, you can look at their plan in 1975. You'll see what it is.
That's all.
I'd like to know if there's any this is a very general question, but if there's any effort within the city of Bowie with when, I'm gonna pick on one project that's been very high profile, the hockey rink, gigantic basketball, whatever, that huge athletic facility that was very controversial. Is there any effort on the city's part to, when a big project like that comes along that could potentially eat up all the funds, it could go towards the trails, expanding the trail network? Is there any effort on the city at that point to say, let's dedicate, 5%, 1%, whatever it is of our city,
That's a good question,
projects
yeah.
that could be dedicated to that, rather than trying to, pick up the scraps of what's left over when all the.
And I think some of the communities that we were talking about in their bond measures allocated a dedicated portion of those bond fees for pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So I think your point, I think, is well taken. I can't respond to the city's decision on those regards, but those thinking it a good tool to use are to make sure that in future bond measures that pedestrian and bicycle related facilities to that bond measure are done. And we'll take one more and then we're going to switch around.
I've been in Bowie for 20 years. One thing I've noticed, when the Bowie Town Center went in, pedestrian and bicycle access was an afterthought. And actually, as it was designed, it was actively discouraged. I mean, the sidewalks on both sides of 197 took about, 8-9 years to go in. The traffic lights, an extra set didn't go in until the new city hall went in, and there was actually a couple of pedestrian deaths at that intersection. Has there been a shift in thought so that when there's new construction projects and new zoning requests to change, to require pedestrian access, not as an afterthought and not as an act of discouragement, but a requirement?
Yeah, all right, Joe, do you want to answer that? You need the proper.
Well, that's, that example that you're giving, when the town center was approved, that was back in the mid-'80s. And so the laws have changed since then. The county does require for all projects going through the subdivision review process that they conduct a bicycle and pedestrian analysis. And there's a report that's required to be done, and there's a certain percentage of money that is required to be spent on some improvements, even off-site. So the county has really come a long way in terms of its development regulations than what they were back in 1986. I was here then, and we were trying to do the best we could, but as a requirement now, all developers will have to do this analysis and actually contribute funding to improving the bicycle and pedestrian system. So I think your concern is addressed now by the way the law is written.
All right, I think if you have more questions, you can, as we get into our discussion groups, you'll see some of these cards are different colors. You can write those down and pass them up to me, and maybe at the end we can try to address some of them. I want to make sure we spend enough time talking around amongst yourselves. What I think I want to do as we move into this next phase is to take, it looks like we lost one here, so maybe these two could join this table, that's right, and then we'll consolidate. I think everybody else has 4 or 5 people in their group, maybe 6. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is just have some discussion questions. We have staff to help facilitate that as we go through. We'll want you to spend a little bit of time discussing the priorities for improvements. So now's a chance, you got the top one, and then on the for either both pedestrian uses and wheeled users, I guess. If it's a horse, then we need to just call that out as well. Didn't know which group that fit in. And then after that brief discussion, then look at what you're suggesting and see if there's some criteria that you could use to help inform the city council in their decision making. What is it? Safety? Is it a connection from here to there that would make 2 trails work better together? So that would be the third part of that. And then the second part of the discussion is going to be trying to identify, I'll call it the next Bowie Heritage Trail, and hopefully it won't take, what'd you say, 1991? It's 94. I've worked on projects that long, and so I know how that goes. And so let's get it into place. We want you to kind of identify what you think, you as a group discussing it, would be that next Bowie Heritage Trail. And using that kind of 4 to 5 mile bicycling one-way length and the one, thinking about the 1 mile, I think people will walk longer if it's easier to do. And then we'll have somebody from each group will come up and report back to the group. We have till about 11:15 or so. So I'm going to put a clock up on the wall. Each table should have a facilitator, I think. And if you guys could join over there, let's get started and see if we're missing a facilitator at any table. Lori could go to that one. You can-
I have 4 kids and my wife and I and our family, we use them a lot. And would love to see them expanded for the reason that there's some connectivity issues. There's some things we can't get to that we'd like to see, sort of resolved. And it's one of the reasons why, honestly, I've stayed in Bowie, because the places that I've looked, I'm like, they just don't have the trails, and we've really come to enjoy them. So we both, we bike and walk where we can, and so that's the main reason why I'm here, is if we can sort of just make sure that whoever's the decision makers are know, like, hey, these are what we think the priorities should be.
Well, afterwards, we'll talk to you about Walk Wednesdays.
John Teasdale, I'm with the multimodal subcommittee of the Green Team, and I've walked and biked in Bowie for many years.
Joshua Woodson, also Bowie Green Team. That's about it. Okay, and that's iffy.
So the type of improvement then to address that would be what, an off-road type?
A safer way to transit the major roadways. Okay.
So it could take multiple
Our marked
forms.
area doesn't work. People treat that as a marked park area. Okay, go up and down the Stony Brook. That's a marked park area, not a safe area.
I wonder if the police enforced it and ticketed people more, maybe people would stop.
I don't
And
know
that
if
would
it's
be
a ticket
easier.
every day. I don't think people even know
Yeah.
that that's a dedicated thing. Oh, that's nice. They marked it off of my parking in front of my house. As opposed to using my drive.
Okay, like I'm new to the Bowie area, my wife and I have only been here for less than 18 months now. And so, we're realtors, so we see a lot of the whole area and everything like that, showing homes and things like that. What I would like to see, because we're in the age of technology and everything like that, is you know how they do the visual trails, and it's almost like you're on a bike with your 360 camera, and actually go through the trails and actually showing people the different trails that we have to make them more excitable. So it'll show each trail, and it will also show how friendly the trail is, and show just everything for a new user, and it also shows over a progression of time the erosion of the trail and things that we maybe need to do with the Joe's department to keep the trails up, and it identifies it from start to finish. It would already indicate its timeline.
So the Google Earth of
Exactly. You know, just even if you took an experienced person who bikes and they go through each one of the trails, mapping it out and showing it, and in that way.
Little GoPro.
Exactly, little GoPro, and you go online and say, you know, I wonder if I really need to be in a trail. I've never done it before. Let me see what the GoPro shows for Bowie.
I have to imagine that would be pretty easy to do, given that City of Bowie website.
Right.
It's a resource.
Pull up each trail and be able to
So to get it
It's a low-cost way of putting a resource there.
I'm gonna piggyback on that, with that concept, because my thought was to have those stationary things that you stick your bike in and you just ride. So while you're riding, you're looking at these trails, like in the inclement weather, you know,
You can
think,
just download it.
well, a quarter of the folks or more won't go out in the winter, right? So you set them up in the senior center, you set them up in the gym, I don't know where else, but the idea that you get on and you have a preview of what you can do outside of the winter.
You actually ride
And you're riding your bike.
And you know what, that would pick up so quickly.
You got someone taking notes?
Sort of, yes.
You could put stuff down here.
Yeah, we're going to.
just getting down on
We're talking about like this,
We're talking about. All right, I was mentioning to him here, there are signs from here to here saying that there's bike lanes, but they're not marked, they're not bike lanes. And then when they repaved it, I'm convention with the state highway administration about it, but anyway.
Okay. Okay. So
But you
that's
see
kind
the-
of,
If you ever drive in DC, you see bike lanes all the time.
yes you do. Yes you do.
I go Beller Drive, and then I go across the light at Moylan by St. Pius, and I take that through to Chapel Forge, the racetrack. So but if there was a network of maybe directional signs for bicyclists that could direct them to because you don't live here, it's really hard to navigate the 11th Street to get from one part of Bowie to the other.
It is true because being a grid, but being at these three-way intersections, there's a lot of wiggling. And I take that same route to get to the WB&A, and that's a one-way route. That's a way where from the R section you can connect to WB&A. But if you get off the WB&A and you want to get back, you're either riding against traffic on that shoulder, or you have to cross 4 lanes of traffic to get to the shoulder on the other side, to climb the hill, to cross 4 lanes again, where there's nothing to stop traffic, and traffic is notoriously speeding in that stretch.
Can you tell me in particular where that is? We'll write it down, or we can mark it up on the map. These are these particulars are good
Trail, and
things
this
to
is
have.
197, right? So,
Yeah, right,
so
right
this
here.
is this little stretch.
You can come out of the R section, you can go here. If you get off the trail and you want to get back in the neighborhood, you're either going against traffic on the shoulder, or you have to, but there's no traffic control device.
Right on there, problem connect.
With any of the paths along like 450 and 197, going up toward the shopping center, any of the crossings, the shopping center here by the church.
Any crossing any of the significant or busy roads.
You gotta watch. You really have to be mindful, and a little bit of color, even those bollards, a lot of times are enough that drivers are trying to.
More reflective paint sometimes, better signage. There's little things you can do to improve the crossings, that's for sure.
You said widening, right? The widening.
Well, if possible. I didn't mention it. I mean, that was mentioned at the beginning. I'm just separation from cars and person, either distance or visually or a barrier, something to make people feel safer. And that's in a variety of places around the city. It's not just
Yeah, specifically 197. I'll take that road.
Yeah.
And then I wonder, going all the way to Laurel, there's bike lanes on both sides of that very narrow road. Who maintains that? Is that
That's state highway.
That's state highway. They need to do something about 197.
Our plan actually recommends a continuous side path or a trail between Bowie and Laurel. So that would supplement or replace the bike.
Well, and it seems like there's lots of space to get the right of way to do that.
Yeah, so I think they could do it between the road and
that's
the
all
fence
federal
for
property,
the
right?
refuge.
There needs to be a barrier between the bikes and the tires.
Yeah.
Because that would be dangerous. When you're
Yeah, there is
going
no
down
barrier
197,
right
and you're on a bike trail, you don't have anything.
There's no
Oh,
barrier.
well, he was talking about
Where the trains are, that road, that section there that takes you over to Old Bowie. It's really no shoulder at all for cyclists at all. And the asphalt has holes and potholes, things in it.
You're saying from Old Bowie to which day?
You're from 197, so basically when you come from Racetrack Road and you cross over 197, and then you're coming over to, I think that's that Veterans Park here. That area, that road that comes across, that's it. It's really not biker friendly at all. It's not, or walker friendly as a matter of that fact. There's really no true shoulder or path for pedestrians. I see people walking along those roads and there's really no place for them to walk. And same thing for the cyclists they have, and it's in disrepair. So you're looking at a historical park with a visitor center, but then your roads leading there are very poor. And if you're going to have a visitor area, if you're going to have a visitor
criteria, like for places you want people to go to.
Right, exactly. You've got to have roads that are going to be in pristine condition to encourage them to go. So
we want to try to kind of focus the last few minutes on this, just like that.
Okay.
Criteria. You're going to have a place to visit.
What I was going to say is the other, I suspect in that area, it's representative of another impediment that we don't see. We don't see where the property lines are, i.e. where's private property and where's the roadway right of way.
That's true.
So, but we don't want to view that as an insurmountable impediment. But when jurisdictional officials like Joe and the state highway people have a meeting, when they run into that impediment, it's pretty much an insurmountable impediment. Because having the formal government go to people and propose that we get their private property to make things better for bicycling and walking doesn't go over too well, so they tend to, they don't have a really good PR mechanism for doing that. So that's another place where organized citizens can really step in, because you represent people who actually would use it, and you are really essentially neighbors with those people. And people tend to respond much better to their neighbors who have a real need, and you talk about safety, and they talk about kids walking to school, and that can often open the door to create some citizen relationship around the issue to make it possible then for the jurisdictions, to follow behind and actually, make it happen. So that's something just to keep in mind. And the first step of those kind of things is when you do see those kind of issues, one thing that Joe and the government staff can do is they can look at resources and try to really understand, is lack of right-of-way the issue? Do we need to get to buy property or not? What's the barrier? Other times, sometimes another big barrier that's a challenge is, well, there's a whole bunch of power poles right where we need to put a shoulder. And so if we put a shoulder in, the bicyclist...
Very often I'll see them walking down that middle lane.
Yes.
Because there's no other place to walk.
I mean, there is no other way if you want to go to Crawford.
Right.
It just doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I do ride that, but what I usually do is I cut through the public works, and then this at least there's a bit of a shoulder.
Yes. So, and the sad part is because the Governor's Bridge Road thing is out of commission. The East Coast Greenway has a huge detour that brings you right down that horrible section of 3 and 450. So we hosted somebody doing the American Heritage Trail walking across. And we spent a long time on Google Maps just telling them how to safely navigate that section of the American Discovery Trail. It broke my heart that we couldn't send him down here over the Governor Bridge Road. An official route.
Walking works.
Still, yes.
So I haven't been back to Governor Bridge since they closed it. Is it still open for pedestrians?
Well, no, not really. They put ginormous boulders on the entrance. When Ken and I did our bike trip, we had to break down the bike and pick it up and carry it across. And we weren't sure, we figured our weight wasn't going to do anything, but I'm not sure how else to facilitate it.
So they're building a new,
No, this is Boys and Girls Club, I think.
Okay, it's time to move on to topic number 2. We have about 35 to 45 minutes to now take all your good thoughts and try to think about how to create the next Bowie Heritage Trail. So at this table, I was just hearing a conversation about something along the Patuxent River would be great, or along Collington Branch. So just start discussing a little bit more broadly now about how to kind of give some identity to your trail system so that when you go to get money, you say, we want funding for, it really becomes a destination or something you can name, something you can communicate very easily to people that want to use it or know more about it or encourage them to get on their bike or go for a long walk at here. So that's where I want you to move now. I put the first set of questions are about just kind of go around the table, make sure everybody talks, just brainstorm a broad idea. So we had a couple here was Patuxent River, Collington Branch, right? And along the railroad system there. So that's the kind of thinking in the first question. The second question then is to take all those ideas, we're going to list them all in the plan as ideas, but narrow them down and see if you can come up with maybe amongst yourself which would be the top 1 or 2, and then use the yarn or the markers and try to make that route work on the map. But don't worry about if there's you can't get over the bridge or this or that, just circle it. Don't try to solve it in the 15 minutes that you have available. Say, I'd like to go from here to here. Circle the area that's really constraining you, but don't let that constraint stop you from trying to make a very nice, enjoyable trail experience. So, okay, so we're going to go to about 11:15 on this set. I'm going to give you kind of a 20-minute warning and then a 10-minute warning. So hopefully I'll keep walking around and try to encourage you to keep focused on this particular task. So go for it. I'm hearing a lot of great conversation. Thank you. All right.
You're near Racetrack Road, so I'd be interested in hearing, like, are there segments or, because I feel like if we break it down in sections, and then you sort of like, I could see then it's like all these different quarters obviously then connect, so I don't know, what are the needs up there? Like, where would your destinations be?
So I think like John was saying, so right now, yeah, they just did the spurt not too long ago, and so we have this right here, so this is the river, but there is actually, I've kind of walked this, it's a unpaved path that's still kind of wild, but there's no bridge there, but it would be nice if this was connected here because, I don't know what's going to happen with Pimlico, but, this area could be...
That's a whole nice park.
Yeah, so if this is revitalized, then, this can bring a bit more...
Are you saying adding you said a park, are you saying adding a destination or just connecting existing trails? Like, is that purple an existing?
Yeah, this purple is a trail.
It says a hiker, or wait, is that bike lane or?
No, that's hiker, yeah, because this is Saddlebrook.
So this hiker biker, is that paved,
It's I don't know if this is paved, yeah.
That is a hiker bike. Yeah, that is the hiker biker, and quite honestly, I don't think that's paved.
Yeah, because I know that there's a huge parking lot. I don't think this is paved.
Here, you got a lot more use here.
Yeah.
See, but where the shopping is where we've got the high heat.
I've thought about starting the city hall, which is the town center, going to Town Hall, through the back route here, through the woods, and then
down into the concrete bridge to do that walking, and then to get out to here. This is our natural church road park.
Yes.
We have a national preserve area there, so you could do a Volkswagen march all the way through that natural area.
Yes, and that would, and it would create this whole continuum.
And over time, you can improve the little
Right. Footpaths and everything in
It
there.
just takes my brain a minute to figure it out.
Yes, it's a good idea, Chair. Like I said.
Oh, I know what this room is. This is all HOA.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, a little bit. It makes a big difference. But you know what, even to something like this here, when we talk about just visual, it'd be nice to have, say, like a follow-up where, once again, I'm going back to my GoPro, is actually having someone go through and showing a visualization of what we're talking about and where improvements can be made.
Which is where you're going to have to be if you're going to
Yes.
go beyond.
And showing them that there's an actualization here, you know, potentially, but it's just the way to.
So for me, it's this side, that way. Below here.
You're doing a pretty good job.
No, I think you're good.
We're going to work from the list that Linda has been writing down, okay? We could have used the board, but maybe this is easier. Okay, it works for you. That's great.
Because it's down.
Okay, right. Okay, so, well, it's the Bowie Heritage Trail is, the theme is the heritage of Bowie, of that area of Bowie.
A lot of history.
A lot of
rich history. Tons.
Yes, so that was the theme of that.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the Bowie Heritage Trail, in essence, is where all trails meet, or is that
No.
one trail?
It's one trail.
And what's the distance?
Right now, it's only about a quarter of a mile, but, you know, in the end, several years out, it would probably be in the vicinity of 2 to 3 miles, perhaps.
You're talking this right here.
No. It's up there in Old Town.
This is.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that the light purple. Can somebody point to where light purple is?
It's down here.
Heritage.
Right here.
Just kind of rubber band and not really do a route, but you know, have a way that starts to loop around Old Bowie, because you can kind of go this way, you kind of hit some parks. There's some retail here.
White Marsh, yeah. Even this, Buckingham is a cool little park, Somerset. And then we haven't talked about Linda, you and I talked about the bridge over Route 50 is a fantastic. Have you ever ridden on the bicycle bridge?
Yeah, it goes over to North.
That's a really
kind of contact
important thing that
retail
connects
The one that comes up behind the movie theater, right?
parks,
Yeah.
soccer fields, parks, kind of loop around. They're kind of getting a little bit of if there's a way to.
There's really nice, very little park up there behind.
I wonder if there's something with all these continuous parks that could be a potential.
Up there behind TD Bank, it's right across from Bowie Town Center. There's a nice little park up there.
Right.
And then up there where there's a cemetery for, I forgot who it is, I was buried there. One of the very early important civil war people.
Right.
Or at least add vegetation that's pretty.
Right.
So the other thing would be, yes, more access on this side, better ways to get across 3, and more trails and access on this side.
Okay. So your first priority is this power line trail, and then better access to the east side of town.
If we're talking about major trails, yes. But I think a priority would be improving some of the connectivities that we have now, because those, we could see the effects of soon. This is another one I'm going to be dead before this one's done. But I think the priority would be to picking areas that are very fundable and very close, and saying, well, let's put some
good resources into these little tiny spots, that would make things better.
The loop kind of down here, but amongst these loops, you still have
So we
a.
want to pick our top two loops.
This is one big loop, so it's just one of the top priorities. Control it. We're going to figure it out. Just give us the money.
When they're doing racetrack roads, those officers has to get in with the state highways and say, protected by
Just close the loop and come around.
Do we have any other ideas for a destination?
Pollinator trail,
The utility lines on this corridor. Right through here.
We were trying to follow it.
Initially, what we were looking at was trying to do something here, maybe connect the WBA down through this corridor. There's an agreement, I don't know if you're aware that the Petco and PG&E, part of the agreement to that was they would allow for some development in some of these corridors and trails. They wouldn't build the trail. They would not oppose them, and they would allow accessibility and stuff like that. So they've done this in the government thing. They've opened one up just this last year.
And Columbia has.
It could be. All you have to do is put the title on the map and draw the line. She said, hey, it all goes together, right?
Idea that you were talking about.
North-south is a big deal.
To me, the north-south thing brings in a number of the things that you guys have mentioned, because all these things that you mentioned here are part of making that north-south thing happen and stay connected.
Yeah, some kind of unifying theme would be, some kind of unifying theme would be good. I don't know what a good title for that is.
I've talked to cyclists, during my cycling. I've talked to people that have come from around the country because they are really impressed with basically the trails. They said we come here just to cycle the trails in Maryland. So, they brought up the trail here. They've also brought up the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail, the Indian Hill Rail Trail, just as examples. And so they come from far away, believe it or not. And I'm just, I'm very friendly. So I thought, find out about that. So, and like you said, as long as you have the trail far enough, like you said, finding 12 feet is much better. I've done narrow trails, and the wider is the way to go because you need them to be able to accommodate a multi-use.
Right. That's how we better accommodate the pedestrians and the cyclists.
Right. You have to.
And then they're going to complete the sidewalk. So I think that's a good example of what Joe was saying, where we can get developers to do some good improvements that improve for walkability.
So, we have been trying for a long time to get something done with the town because it's amazing. Tonight, I went for a major real estate company. They came and just said there's just nothing.
Where's this at?
The Old Town Bowie area, where all those old abandoned antique shops and stuff are. If we could get something there, the builder probably would participate in the sidewalks because it would draw people there to spend money. It's just that we haven't ever come up with an idea of what we could put there to make this area.
There's a group that's starting up, I think, that's trying to push this whole town as an arts and entertainment district.
They've been trying to do it.
Yeah.
That's what, I was part of it. Because I was saying what other developers, and I was like, oh, I want to put a pretty major one. There's all those Bowie State kids. There's nowhere for them to walk to even go hang out on a Saturday night. They have to drive. They were driving down. You have to find somebody in the car. They were driving to the CVS and going to Little Caesars. That's now closed. You see the University of Maryland, and there's tons of pizza shops. There's nothing for those kids.
That's what I don't get.
And they
Is
could walk, I
that,
mean, if they had what, they could walk down to the little area, they could be spending money.
yeah.
Well, I don't understand why we can't. Like, because of idea, like every college campus has that, except Bowie State. And that would pay for, the developers would participate if we could show that that could be traffic.
Yeah,
These are popular.
What's that?
This is the north-south.
Oh, yeah.
It's like every map has.
What is that?
Great, keep going. So as you go along, try to zero in on. We got about halfway through. Just try to zero in and identify some kind of features or things that would sell that as an idea. What is it that would attract people to using this? Or in some of these cases, how would you get there? This is almost all of it's outside the city. You don't know how would you get there. So links to it might become important.
Well, and one selling point for this is that it would connect the 450 trail with the WBNA.
yeah.
So that's good. We need to get this good information down so I can put it into a report.
Yeah, we got a few priorities and we got a few bigger picture ideas.
Great, perfect.
And I actually have seen actually an increase in bikes, cyclists, on Chestnut Avenue.
Okay, time is fleeting. Everybody ready to present your ideas? I think somewhere we have a portable microphone. I think what we'll do is just bring the microphone to each table, and then maybe someone can either hold it up to the group, or I can hold it up. And then we can go through. So someone from each group that's not the facilitator should be presenting this, and we'll start maybe with, are you guys ready? We'll start with this table right here.
So, wait, are we holding this?
I can hold it up.
Do you want to start with the question first or with
Yeah, do the questions first and then move. Each group should be about 5 minutes.
I mean, they can't see.
We can bring it up.
Okay, so on the first question regarding what types of improvements we'd like to see to the trail system that lead to more trail use for pedestrians, we sort of talked about bikes and pedestrians all at the same time. So you're not going to be quizzed on this, so you don't have to memorize. But just one, beautification. At least me personally, I am out on the trails or sidewalks or out for a walk for two different reasons. One, just for the personal enjoyment of being outside, or two, to get somewhere. Sometimes the trail itself is the destination. So, if there's a way we can increase, the beauty of our existing trails, or making sure that future trails are a beautiful place to be, would hopefully entice more people to use them, or future people to even move to and consider Bowie as a destination. There were some couple of connectivity was another issue. It's like there's some great trails, but it's like I want to get there, so but I can't. Whether it's because ourselves as individuals, or I know myself with kids, it's not a safe way to get somewhere. Some major pinch points were seeing people cross Route 50 on 197 in the bridge, and so does that need to be improved? Places where there are some places where don't have existing sidewalks where the trails just end, and so you can't get where you want to. We're not presenting anything from our drawing, right? Are we?
Yeah.
We are? Okay.
Yeah. Got 2 minutes on this and 2
Okay.
minutes on the other.
So I'll just get to, out of all of our discussion, the biggest thing that we sort of came up with, and I think I'll put this up now, because that'll. So again, connectivity was a big thing that we ended up talking about. So what we, sort of the big idea was this sort of, this greater Bowie trail loop, that sort of parallels some of the natural things that exist, like the Patuxent River or the Collington Branch, and then somehow connecting it. So from the outside, you're in a more natural environment, and then from within, over time, making sure that you have the connections, within this loop. So you can take that natural trail and then connect to the Bowie Town Center or the libraries or shops or your homes. And so there are little notes here, I think, but that's the sort of big idea that we ended up coming
Well, I
up with.
think one big concept was making Bowie a destination. So people that come on like the East Coast Greenway would come to Bowie because they would have like the old Bowie Arts District or good places to stop and eat or stay along the way.
Back on what they just said, and where John and your group had the idea of that outer loop, well, we're going to be the inner loop. So we want to incorporate, but we're all on the same page with that. And we've outlined on this map where the Heritage Trail up in the north eventually will be a complete loop, so that's the north loop. Then we have the south loop down here in blue, which is kind of internal to what you all just said for an outer loop. So forget the Beltway, we have our own inner and outer loop. The other idea is that, and a lot of folks said during inclement weather, that they don't want to go out and do anything. So we decided to create a virtual tour of pathways and trails and whatever, and on that virtual trail that you can watch it while you're riding a stationary bike, which could be at the gym, at Bowie, pick your places. So that's our really good idea. We complement and echo the themes of safety and the fact of transitions, that I know that in my household we don't bike so much because it's not pleasurable. You're dodging cars, you're looking for cars, and then you get to a road and you go, oh my gosh, and then people are walking on the sidewalks, and it's not a pleasant experience. So the idea that what is pleasant, the WB&A trail, the ones that exist, that we want to enhance them. And to that end, we want to have, like, if you've ever come to Bowie Fest, and the kids have the passports, where they go from, that we want to have passports around the city where families can, family-friendly areas, whether they're walking trails, biking trails, but we didn't get this figured out yet. But the idea of where you have good signage that the kids can either, I don't know, they'll figure it out, how to make sure that you've been there with the, what do you call those, QR codes or something, that you register that way. So we keep track of who's using the trails. They get the information. We also have improved signage. If you walk the trails at White Marsh, you know that there is some signage, two different kinds. One for the trail itself, blue, green, red, whatever. The other is, points of interest. Did you know this is an oak tree? And do you know that oak trees attract more insects than any other kind of tree? So you're getting all this education plus the experience, so you're heightening that whole thing. What else do we have? Bowie Town Center. We want to tear up the roads in the center part of it. Where you drive internally. We want to tear them up and make it a pedestrian mall where you can bike there, and we're going to connect it to City Hall, where it has a trail, and you can also go to Allen Pond. And so therefore, not only do you have that extended connection, but you also can make it handicap friendly. And then of course the whole idea of a mall downtown, we're going to rip up the middle of where the road are, put trees in and you have seating and whatever, so people are attracted to come with families. I didn't tell my table this, but I think we could take an empty store and have, not a pet shop, but have like the Eco Nature for Wildlife, whatever it is, have them come and have certain times when animals are there, that sort of thing. So, did we get it all?
The volunteerism. The volunteerism. All this opened up opportunity for volunteerism.
Oh my gosh, yes, we need lots of volunteers to do this. So we're gonna have our own Habitat for Humanity. We're just gonna build trails and sign them. Howard, you get all the scouts involved. Howard's a member of the Bowie Green Team and works with the scouts. Linda knows the Girl Scouts. So, anything else?
That's it.
All right, thank you.
So we tried to address the three major questions here. Let's start off with walking. Instead of focusing on trails, a lot of our walking effort was just about how people are actually using them. And one of our biggest concerns kind of came down to safety. And our ideas for the safety really started off with very simple, obvious improvements. Better road markings, maintaining the road markings for pedestrian crossings. You know, I'm sure you've all seen places where it's a pedestrian crossing and the markings have worn off the road. Better signage, better lighting for people who are jogging early in the morning or late at night. And finally, and this is kind of one of the bigger points, is sidewalks where it's kind of obvious that you need them. Sidewalks or even shoulders or trail, the side trail. One example that was mentioned in our group was along Racetrack Road. If you live on the other side of Racetrack Road, there really is no pedestrian access to pretty much anything. And I think a lot of it, of our focus is on the small, obvious things that we kind of need, but understanding that not all of this is controlled by Bowie, but, you know, hopefully we can talk with our partners. The other thing is involving the Bowie police on police enforcement. I can't tell you how many times I've almost been hit crossing 197 with the pedestrian signal by people running a red light to make a right-hand turn. I mean, this is, you know, it's really easy to enforce. It's, you know, hopefully something that we can do at virtually no cost. The other thing is, and our facilitator has told me I'm wrong, I mean, I've been here for a long time. I've never seen a police officer on the trails. And
I have once.
Okay. You know, it's, you know, let's face it, we are in suburbia and there are different minds of what the vision is. Is this going to be heavy pedestrian access or heavy car access? And people are worried about crime. And I think involving the police in just a neighborhood enforcement and safety patrol might help. The other thing I would say is pedestrians are very mindful of very direct routes versus being forced to walk around very out of the way to get to their destination. One of the easiest ways to get more pedestrian involvement is connectivity from living spaces to services. And anytime you make a pedestrian walk an extra half mile to get to the services, and you know, we talked with our facilitator about a few examples, it really turns off pedestrians. So it's, some of these will be very easy to chip away at, others are more difficult. The biking question. One of the things we talked about was trail maintenance. There's the whole tree roots issue. It's messy, it's expensive, it's complicated, but it discourages people like me from using bikes on the trails. A lot of the other issues kind of come back to the safety issues. Personally, I am terrified of at-grade crossings on these side paths, compared to biking in the shoulder. But that's my own issue. It's also simple things like shoulder maintenance, road maintenance that sometimes we can't always get the state to take care of. So on the trail network question, we kind of focused a little bit on the heritage trail aspect. Our conclusion goal was not as ambitious as the first two groups. What we were really looking at is connecting historical landmarks of Bowie in a trail network. Connecting old Bowie to the racetrack to the Bel Air Mansion, trying to take advantage of available paths and trails to the best we can, and sort of forming a loop that uses existing trails or in some cases existing sidewalks as we can. One of the things that we did talk about here is adding signage, nature signage, but also historical signage. But as we go, if this group goes forward with it, I point out that the history of Bowie is complex and sometimes dark. And this is something you want to acknowledge, but address carefully. It's, you know, it's something that we want to involve local history professors on, okay? Did I miss anything? Okay, thank you very much.
Directly answer the questions in the way that other groups did. It wasn't his fault, it was mostly us. But we did come up with some trail ideas. So I work for Exelon, the company that owns Pepco and BGE, and with the Pepco merger, if you're not aware, the company made a commitment to allow trail development along its transmission corridor. So I know the section in Bowie is very small. Well, it's good, but the company's not going to pay for it. So they'll let you have access to the corridor, but the money has to come from somewhere, right? So it has to be raised at the local level, at the county level, at the state level. And they've actually done one of the preliminary trails in Montgomery County. If you've heard about it, the trail at the Soccerplex, I think it's just a dirt trail right now, but there are plans to potentially expand it based on funding and use and stuff like that. So this is obviously like a big pie in the sky long-term dream, but having that big transmission corridor trail run north to south would be phenomenal. Getting this trail connecting up with what the group over there was suggesting, to loop down around the other side, and then connecting everything together. You know, getting the connection on the WBNA. Obviously, everybody knows that's in the works to cross the Patuxent there and connect what we have with what Anne Arundel County has. Getting the connection around Bowie State and then out around the Bowie Heritage Trail. Many of you may not even know this. Have you heard of Tanglewood Park? We have this little park in Bowie that the city just removed from the website when we started asking questions about it. It does exist. Harass your city council people about this little park. It's nothing fabulous. It's not Central Park, but it's a park. And it has trails, and they're marked. But it needs a little TLC. There are a lot of down trees back there. The trail markings need to be, refreshed. But it's a cute little park, and it's a nice place, a nice resource to have, right? We have White Marsh Park, we have this little park, and it exists already. All it needs is just a tiny little bit of money to clean it up. So yes, there's our trails map, and then some of the other priorities we had were Chestnut Avenue and High Ridge Road. There's no shoulder. It's really dangerous. People drive very quickly back there, so improvements there to create a shoulder sidewalk. I don't know why this is doing what it's doing. 197 and Kent Hill Drive, safety improvements. So a lot of the similar things that others are suggesting, where existing trails and paths we have. intersect with traffic, to just make those better so that people feel safer going out and using those resources. I think it's any sort of biking and walking and running amenities are those types of things where you might not get a lot of people screaming for them, but when they exist and they're done well, people come out of the woodwork for them. And there are countless examples of other cities that have taken that initiative and put those resources in, and it's exploded. So yeah, Tanglewood Park, we put on there some of those big projects. Low-cost improvements to existing work. That's what I got.
Anybody else at the table have any?
Okay, so basically, we did come up with a theme. The Bowie Heritage Trail Network. Basically, with following the Heritage Trail, it covers the different heritage, the history of Bowie. And so that's why we came up with that. We pitched the trail as being for health, and in addition to that, we wanted to also highlight the walking and the cycling aspect. We wanted to touch on the fact that we could have, because I don't know if you're aware, we've seen a lot of cycling groups come through, and there are a lot of walkers. So we thought that Bowie State University, I don't know if you know, already has a cycling tour that they hold every year now. And so basically we said in addition to that, you could hold some 5Ks. It's good for fundraising for the city of Bowie and any causes that the city of Bowie might have. In addition, we could also have sponsors for that. A lot of people touched on the heritage, again, the history, the Bel Air Museum, the Radio Museum, the Railroad Museum, as well as other, and the equestrian history of Bowie as well. You guys discussed points of interest, so I won't further discuss that because you guys talked about that. In addition, we had, let's see, feeder systems. The maintenance of the trails basically are important. The trails are deteriorating quite a bit. We have the bridges that go over the bridge that goes over 197, for example, is in very poor shape. The wood is pretty much deteriorated. We have some drainage problems. The tunnel that goes under 193 lacks lighting, and it is a safety hazard. So, as well as the asphalt and drainage problems. So maintenance is very important. Let's see. Here, we talked about that. Anything else? Because I think most of the things that everybody talked about were also our ideas, and also the connections and the lack of the networks. So we want to connect everything so there is a network. The loop ideas, I think, are great that everybody presented earlier, but there were a lot of gaps, so you don't have the connection of the trails. So they wanted, and also you all discussed, which I think this gentleman over here just discussed, the electrical path of the utility freeway, having a trail going there as well. And basically, like they said, the networks, these are the different networks here. Then we have basically with Mitchellville area, that's over by the Mitchellville Road, and 197. And what's that? They just want a north-south network, basically. They think that's very important to have the north-south.
Anything else from your group that we missed?
Anything else that we missed? Oh, also they wanted to have some benches along the trails as well. Yeah, benches, just things that other trail networks do have. It's, for example, the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail. Maryland, I don't know if you guys are aware, is a popular destination, believe it or not, for walkers and cyclists. So we want to make sure that we are one of the preferred destinations for trails as well. So that's.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. We're in agreement with what other people have been stating so far. We've had similar discussions and similar topics, so I think that's good. There's a lot of synergy here with what everybody's thinking. Some things I think are important for pedestrians we talked about is safety, especially at large intersections. Perhaps having parking access to the trails so that people who are maybe a little less capable of walking a long distance can get to a place where they can have a nice walk, maybe with handicap accessible parking, that sort of thing. I think we want to reiterate the idea about signage. We think that would be a big plus. More than just, here's a road that's a bike route. Maybe there could be different colored routes. Here's the north-south route. Here's the route that takes you to town center or the library or to Old Bowie, perhaps. More thing for pedestrians would be better crosswalks, being able to cross their. An example of trying to cross from Marketplace to Free State, that's a challenge. I think to reiterate on the trail maintenance, I think a component of that is an adequate dedicated funding source in order to make that happen. And pedestrian and bicycle access to commercial properties. There's a lot of places where the infrastructure either gets close or right up to it, and then it's the last bit that's missing. And you can tell some places where that's the case, to kind of piggyback on pedestrians wanting the shortest path. You'll see what are called desire lines. Basically the place where the grass doesn't grow, where everybody walks, where they cut through the landscaping. Tells you there's a need of where it should be, perhaps. Some things for biking, we talked about trying to have a trail loop rather than just out and back. And I think some of the maps we've seen promote that idea, which is good. And then accessing into commercial properties. Trail connections to all the parks and museums by extension, along with signage to get us there. There's a lot of parks and historical interests we can actually think we can connect. We also believe in promotion of East Coast Greenway, which was also mentioned. People don't know that that's a route that goes from Maine all the way to Key West. And that group is intending to interconnect communities for people to be able to do non-motorized transportation. So trying to be a destination on there will attract people. And there are people who do the whole thing. And we think that we can try to unify the city through a good trail network, which I'll kind of segue for our route. Having a route that connects Old Bowie through maybe portions of the Heritage Trail, or it could link up with it for wherever the Heritage Trail goes. And be able to kind of work through where the people live, so people can have good access and have a good north-south route where we hit parks, recreation areas where people live, museums, and all the way north and south. But this would be a route to be enough signage that kind of tells you, hey, it's one more mile to Free State. So there's restaurants there, and there's cold drinks and ice cream. And this will just kind of be a beginning of that work. Of course, we want to tap in and have arterials off of this to expand. But this will allow movement throughout the city. And I think this kind of works well with some of the other loops. I think we would want to support those as well. And
11th Streets.
And have some routes that kind of mark how to get through the 11th Streets, because the 11th Streets, well, a lot of three-way intersections is actually a pretty good grid. But how you get across town, it's you have to make a lot of turns. So there could be some ways to
promote low-stress routes, either with less hills or where there's sidewalks for pedestrians, because not all the streets have sidewalks, for instance, or preferred routes for bikers where they can avoid conflicts with drivers. Did I miss anything? All right, thanks.
Since we were the last table, I asked Norm to mark the other tables that had mentioned on our points, so we had a relative idea of the priorities. So we're all into more loops and more recreation trails and better connectivity for our trails, whether it be a walking trail or a biking trail. And so we all talked about, having the active clearing of snow and debris and shoulders and cleaning up the trails. We talked about better signage and maps at trailheads, better connections. And also there was table 4 also talked about rule enforcement. That was something that was good for us, not only from the standpoint of the vehicular traffic, but also to better educate cyclists that it's not lawful to ride the wrong way down the street. So these kinds of things not only decrease safety, but give bad names to cyclists and pedestrians when they're doing something wrong. So rule enforcement for all modes of transportation would be a priority for us, as well as the improvements. It's very frustrating as a pedestrian when you want to cross a street and you have to cross 3 streets to do it with the they don't have full intersections or the beg buttons. So those were all priorities. Now, our version of our loop, many people talked about, but our Bowie Bicycle Beltway would go down the Powerline Trail all the way down to 214 and come up and do better connections on the east side, bringing us through Prince George's Stadium and then the new Melfort. None of us considered the marked bike route on 301 as a safe and viable way to get anywhere. So to have, a beautiful loop all the way around Bowie for recreational cyclists that you could actually go out and do a comfortable 30 or 40 mile ride would be awesome. Because right now we have, you have to go 15 miles this direction and then you have to turn around and go 15 miles the same direction. So loops definitely, whether it be a big, nice, all-day bicycle loop or whether it be an evening walk loop. Don't do this. And as far as priorities for connecting those, we would love to see the O section, the east side of Racetrack Road, to have just better trails, networks, and connections to the WBNA. To force them into Racetrack Road or 450 or nothing, just seems like they've kind of got the short end of the stick there. So we'd start up there with those connections and then move through these new places here, as well as improving our existing infrastructure. So I think that touched on everything. Thanks.
All right, thank you. That was excellent. I think we have the plan written. We're just going to go back and get all these good ideas and document them, which leads me to my request, is that before you leave, if you could kind of package up any of the little comment cards, if anybody wrote on anything that's not attached to anything, if you could just go ahead and put that in the bag with the pens and pencils that were here, and then make sure that everybody signed their John Hancock on the table sheet. And then also, I believe, Laura, you wrote the map numbers on the we'll come and collect the sheets, but we'll need to just write on those sheets before you leave what table you were on, and just kind of number the pages for us. That would be a huge help. So I think that's the last of it. Joe, do you have any other final words of wisdom? On the back of your agenda is the summary of the process. You'll see the next step for us to then kind of pull together this information into a draft plan. And then we will go forward with that for public review of some kind in a couple of stages as it notes there. So I'm really excited by all the great ideas that you put forth. I think we have definitely some consolidation. Thank you so much, and the last group for pulling a lot of those together. I appreciate that. But it's really exciting to see some commonalities and then also some of the new things that people have brought up as well. So as long as we can capture all your comments and get them in that bag, we'll be sure to be able to capture it. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, somebody asked about the bridge over the Tucson River, and
one quick update.
Fred suggests I give an update. Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County are working together with state funding to design the bridge connection over the Patuxent River that will connect the WB&A Trail and the spur on the Prince George's side across to the trail built through the edge of the Two Rivers development on the Anne Arundel side. So in the next couple of weeks, we expect to get design drawing package from the consultant that's at 95%. We've been working out the access route for all the construction equipment and supplies, and this became problematic for environmental reasons. Working in our river valleys, floodplains, and wetlands, our state has protected these areas so much that even when we want to go into them for positive reasons, it's really complicated. So the project has construction funding, although we're going to get a new estimate with the 95% drawings and more clarity about the access route. So we'll probably have an adjustment in our cost. The counties on each side will be responsible for 10% and probably any additional funds that are needed to go over the state grant, which is about in the $5 million range. So we just learned that the project manager in Public Works in Anne Arundel County retired, and they've shifted it to a different staff person on their end. And then we also just learned that Anne Arundel County is having a public meeting that relates to the project in some way that I don't exactly know, and that's Wednesday evening. I think it's at the Two Rivers development area, but you can look on the county or county parks website.
Anne Arundel County.
Anne Arundel County, yes, sorry, thank you for clarifying that. So I think from communication that happened at the end of the day yesterday, that it's this meeting had to happen because of how the series of meetings that happened related to a development, and the Two Rivers development being the driving force in Anne Arundel County. It is a really huge development that has multiple phases, and so it may be that there were things about our bridge project that needed to be updated and revisited. I don't think that there's anything really at stake at this meeting. If there is, they've hidden it from us in Prince George's County. People are welcome to go to it, voice your support for the project. I've been watching and participating in the project for 2 years and have heard almost zero negative about this project. Everybody in both counties that comes to meetings overwhelmingly supports it, and our county governments on both sides support it, and we have parks and public works on both sides engaged in the project. We have state support for the project. So I'm not anticipating that there's any problem in that regard. And we also feel that even though we've had some environmental challenges, they're not of the nature that they're going to stop the project. We feel like we're able to work through and come up with the solutions that we need to keep the thing moving. So that's my report on that.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. That's pretty good information. All right. So Joe, I'm gonna just say, if you know somebody that wasn't able to make this meeting, we're gonna put the PowerPoint up on the trail website, and the address is on the back of your handout. You can also send an email, I think, to Joe with additional input, or if you know people that have, and just if you go on the way home and you think, I forgot about, and want to get that input to us, Joe, make sure it gets us directly to us as we now begin to develop some preliminary drafts for this plan moving forward. Any other questions that?
What's the timing on the summary of all this, and then what's next?
So the summary, we'll probably post that also to the web page, and so the next item that would come from that, if you look on the back of, I'm going to borrow your schedule, is the schedule in here. We are kind of right in here. So we're going to look at all this data. We have some crash information we're collecting, and then we'll begin to develop these sort of a broader vision statement and goals and objectives for the plan. And you see under item 10, there's another public workshop plan. So we'll kind of, that'd be kind of like a preliminary draft, and we want to get your feedback before we go to something more fully developed. So that's the next time. Thank you. Thank you. So again, make sure if there's anything written, comment on a piece of paper, put it in the plastic bags on each table. And other than that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for coming.